Good morning. I am Dr. Sheila Caldwell, and I serve as the Southern Illinois University System Vice President for Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as the Chief Diversity Officer. And it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to today's conversation of understanding, and we are here at SIU Carbondale, so go Salukis, right? Today's conversation is part of our continued partnership with Young Invincible to engage students in meaningful dialogue about their rights, experiences, and the policies that shape higher education. Across our campuses, students have consistently advocated to improve student life, campus safety, addressing tuition increases, dismantling discriminatory policies, and ensuring a more inclusive and representative curriculum. These conversations of understanding are designed to center your voices and create space for informed dialogue and action. Our first session that's happening now will focus on our students' right to learn. This conversation will explore the importance of protecting the freedom to study, research, and engage in dialogue without political interference shaping what can be taught or discussed in higher education. I would argue that's why we exist, for the freedom of ideas. And so at this time, to lead us in that powerful discussion, I would like to introduce Mr. Troy Aline. He serves as the engagement manager in the Midwest Regional Office of Young Invincibles. Troy leads the region's engagement efforts, including the Young Advocates Program and the Youth Advisory Board. He brings nearly a decade of experience as a community organizer and activist, having worked with organizations such as the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, BYP 100, and Chicago Votes. He is also the founder of PodLab Studios, an innovative podcast network and media consulting business. He will serve as our moderator today, and so please join me in welcoming Mr. Troy Aline. Troy, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Place this right here. Is that going to block the screen? Yes, it is. So good. Good morning. How's everyone today? Just good? It's like the best Wednesday of the year, right? Wonderful. There we go. Now I'm encouraged. Perfect. Let's see. So, all right, I will just kind of go back and forth. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I'm very excited to talk to you all a little bit about the right to learn and students reclaiming higher education in general. So this is in collaboration with the Conversations of Understanding series. Huge shout out Dr. Caldwell and SIU's university system for partnering with us on this fairly important, I think it's important, conversation that we're going to have today. So my name is Troy. I am the Midwest Engagement Manager for Young Invincibles. Like Dr. Caldwell said, my role at the organization is really to find young people, train them up, and put them in positions to use their voice, specifically where it's typically not allowed, right? Young people have powerful voices, and a lot of times they're shut out from decision-making spaces. So my job is to find young adults, prepare them for those spaces, and then put them in those spaces. Generally speaking, my job description says setting the engagement strategy and running our programs, but really what it boils down to is making sure that young people feel prepared to have the conversations that they need to in the spaces where decisions about them are being made. So that's a little bit about me. I'm hoping that we can have some kind of community agreements as we share this space. Number one, we're all learners here. Yesterday was my first time doing this presentation, so I'm probably the number one learner in the room. But all of us are learning, right? We're all coming to this space to get information that we don't necessarily have. So let's embrace that, right? We're all here to learn. Also, creativity is going to be important. There's a few interactive pieces in this presentation. I would love for all of your interactions and creativity as we go through those. And then making space, right? For folks who aren't necessarily raising their voices much, trying to encourage those folks to do so, making space for them, but also being aware of how much space we're taking, how much dialogue we're giving to make space for everyone. Do y'all have any agreements we want to add? Or are we good with these? Let's get into it. So today, what we're going to be talking about, our goals today is to explore how higher education strengthens democracy, and we're also going to go through a few different tools to actually do that. All right, first interaction point, I'm testing y'all early. When you hear the phrase right to learn, what words or what feelings come up for you? What does right to learn mean to you?
Previously wasn't a right to learn.
Yeah, that's actually very important. That's a great point. Just the phrase existing means that at some point it didn't, right? So that the right to learn as a concept, even before we break it down, we know that at some point it didn't exist, and now it does. That's actually a really, really good point. And we'll talk about how that came to exist in a little bit. What else? What other words come to mind?
Guess that is something that should be.
Something that should not be denied. I love that. Y'all. I see what's going on. I'm picking up what y'all like there. So, go to the next slide. So, for Young Invincibles, the right to learn really is about students having the freedom to study, research, and really learn and speak without political interference, right? The ability to ingest information that you want to ingest, right, and learn it accurately without kind of I use the word interference, but it's really manipulation, destruction, dismantling, right? Based on politics. So it's really all about the institution's autonomy and student agency at the same time. That's how we are defining what the right to learn is. So it's a combination of the right to teach and the right to learn, all in defense of anything that would dismantle such an opportunity. All right, so we're going to do a quick history lesson. I want to point out some historical context for this conversation. We're talking about student activism in general. I think it's pretty well known that students have been protesting on campuses against wars and things like that. But what a lot of people don't know is that the very first student protest was about food. It's called the Great Butter Rebellion, right? This were Harvard students that basically said this food is trash. We can't do this. And that was the very first time that I should probably say recorded time. This was 1766. But this was the very first time that students decided to protest. Action was taken against them. Some of them were suspended because of this protest. And then also the result was higher quality food, right? So this was the very first time that students kind of put anything to risk, their education, their freedom, their safety, in the name of something that they believed in. And like, this food is trash. Y'all can do something about it, and we're going to say something about it. I think this is a very important time in history, 1766, when students started doing that, because it set the precedent for student power, student activism, kind of leading the way for society's concepts of like change or disagreement with the establishment. So student protest movements for generations have always pushed for improving conditions on campus, right? Thinking about improving student life, so clubs that are available, resources that are available. Thinking about campus safety, tuition hikes, that's an annual fight, right? Thinking about dismantling discriminatory practices, demanding inclusive curriculums. Students have been pushing for progress on their campuses since the beginning of time, since we first started the higher ed institutions. However, what makes students really, really powerful and what makes this really important is because students are also the catalyst for movements outside of the institutional walls. Two early examples of this is the Green Feather Movement, which was a protest against censorship and McCarthyism. This was at Indiana State University, so shout out to the Midwest. This was important because this was one of the first times that students outside of the campus climate that they were at stood up and took a stance about something going on generally in society, right? So this was the first time that they weren't just focused on their own lives or their own conditions. They were kind of expanding out and speaking out generally. Then in 1961, we had this landmark court case, Dixon versus Alabama. The summary here is this court case decided that schools are not a replacement for your parents. They can't control you the same way that your parents do, right? They're not your guardians. And it actually established that it would be unlawful to violate students' rights. So your rights as a student are the same as your rights as a US citizen, right? So your ability to protest and speak out is protected by law. But it wasn't before this court case, right? College institutions basically could punitively punish you or kick you out or any of that simply because you were a student and they acted as your parents. This Dixon versus Alabama in 1961 completely changed the relationship between higher education institutions and students. So let's talk about a little bit more of history behind campus activism. Basically, one of the most important protests that students went through was obviously, I think it's pretty popular, against the Vietnam War. So students were all over the country, very, very active. I would use the word positively, I would use the word disruptive in a positive way. They were being disruptive, right? So much so that the National Guard was called to several campuses. And in particular, Kent State, 4 students were actually killed at that protest. So this is one of the times where I guess the stakes were raised, right? This is no longer just about, oh, I might get suspended or, oh, I might get kicked out of school. This is now a life and death situation that students are now taking the responsibility to still take a stance and protest and, you know, use their voices, even in the face of death, which I think is very, very important. Another historical moment that I like to bring up is Take Back the Night. This is the longest standing annual demonstration against sexual violence in the United States. This happens still annually all over the country. It first started in 1973. And then I also want to draw some attention to the South African apartheid divestment movement for one specific reason, and it's because it reflects something that we're kind of going through today. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, in the next slide or two. But generally speaking, hopefully the point has been hammered home that student activism is intricately tied to the progress that we have as a society. And protecting the students' right to demonstrate and protest and use their voices is integral to how we operate as a society. We do not operate, we do not create change, we do not catalyze new ideas without higher ed institutions supporting their students and being able to express themselves. Very, 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 very important. All right, so all of the historical context that I gave has been fairly old. These examples are a little bit more recent, right? I'm thinking about the Occupy movement. I'm thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement. All of these are demonstrations that are, you know, carrying on that student activism tradition to this day. And then I bolded the present anti-genocide divestment movement because I feel like it's very, very similar to the anti-apartheid movement that I referenced a couple slides ago. But similar things, right? Folks are saying this is wrong. This is happening in another place. It's not necessarily directly affecting me, but it's wrong, and we need to do something about it. And literally right now, going on today, campuses across the country are protesting against genocide all over. So we are keeping up with tradition. This is my last bit of history that I promised to, well, no, it's not, but the last bit of old history that I'm going to give of some really important activism that actually happened on SIU campuses. So in 1949, the Bucket Brigade, is anybody familiar with the Bucket Brigade? Has anybody ever heard of the Bucket Brigade? No? So the Bucket Brigade, basically in 1949, President Morris, who was recently appointed as president, he was dealing with a huge influx of students after the war, right? A lot of folks were going into higher education and, wanted to get educated. At SIU at the time, classrooms were very, very small. Um, Housing spaces were almost non-existent. And so President Morris encouraged all of the students to grab buckets, not only march around through campus, but all of Carbondale, like take over the city, walk around with your buckets. And their demands were for the state legislature to increase the appropriations that go to the university, to improve class sizes, to improve all of these different conditions that they were protesting. And what's really important is they won, right? The state legislature responded, increased the appropriations that were given to SIU. And that really helped change SIU from like a small teachers college to now a world-renowned research institution. That Bucket Brigade event, like protest, I think really kind of for me stands out in kind of demonstrating SIU's commitment to elevating, helping, supporting student voice, and also getting results at the very same time. And then I also like to bring up, I mentioned the Kent State student shootings earlier. SIU actually had a lot of anti-Vietnam War protests during that time that were very, very important, very, very big. And I think what's most important is they were supported by the institution, right? The institution did not try to stamp them out or smother their voices or anything like that. They were very, very supportive. I think that's important because we're going to talk about a few different trends and things that have happened to kind of lay out what it looks like for an institution to kind of navigate what this looks like to support their students and their student voices. So with that being said, we are going to go into a very quick case study about the student athlete activism ban in 2018. So this is kind of recent, fairly new. So in 2018, there were two SIU cheerleaders who took a knee. They took a knee to protest police brutality and violations of civil rights. Very similar to at the time, there was a trend going around. Colin Kaepernick took a knee during an NFL game, got blackballed from the league, but him kneeling kind of became a universal signal of protest against police brutality. And that is what these cheerleaders decided to do before they beat. So in reaction to that demonstration and kneeling, SIU Athletics Department actually created a brand new policy. I'm going to read the policy to you all just so that you can see it. So it is a privilege and not a right. I'm sorry, I'm reading a quote. This is not my opinion. It is a privilege and not a right to be a student athlete, cheerleader, or spirit member at Southern Illinois University. Members of the department, including student athletes, cheerleaders, and spirit members, must remain neutral on any issue political in nature when wearing SIU official uniforms and when competing or performing in official Department of Athletics events and activities. Any display, verbal or nonverbal, of activism, either for or against a political issue, will not be tolerated and may result in dismissal from the program. They took a stance and said, don't do that, basically, right? And threatened your standing at the institution with your club as a result of that. So what do you think the people felt? What were some of the reactions? I can walk through some quotes from stakeholders that were involved in decision making in terms of implementing and creating this policy. Obviously, the SIU cheerleaders were very much so against it, right? Arian talked about it's not a protest against the flag. It's not a protest against Donald Trump. It is a protest for our civil rights that we are still fighting. Seems pretty reasonable. Zarina talked about, I did it because we still haven't had justice against police brutality. Like, maybe if y'all stop killing us, we wouldn't be dealing. How about that? And then Alasia said, because it's such a controversial thing and how people are upset that we aren't standing for the flag because they feel like we are disrespecting America, it does show awareness and brings attention to our cause. So until the problems are solved, we're going to keep doing it. I love that. Like, that's just student activism to a T. The former SIU Director of Athletics says it's not the appropriate place, and we are not wanting to make political statements of any kind when we are representing the university. We have this policy because we're wanting to put forth a message of unity and by taking sides. We have this policy because we are wanting to put forward a message of unity and by taking sides. I think the rest of the quote is we're not doing that. Right? Ed Yonka, great person, by the way, who is the Director of Communications for ACLU Illinois, said that Southern Illinois University's new policy falls short of the critical responsibility of a public university to honor and protect free speech rights for their students. This next part is very, very important. A central purpose for any public university is to engage students and the community in the issues of our time. Schools should not threaten students or hide them away because they engage in protests that some in the community may not agree with. Very, very important statement. And then a SIU media law professor said that the government can make neutral rules for students, but in the process, the government can't discriminate based on the content or the viewpoint of the speech. The university cannot punish a student leader for taking a knee during the anthem if the school is also not prepared to punish pro-flag, pro-military, or Tim Tebow style religious gestures. He's basically pointing out a double standard. You can't have it both ways. You're either going to support everyone's ability to express themselves or no one's ability to express themselves. It's kind of black and white. There's not a lot of black and white things in this world. Like this professor is kind of pointing out, like, kind of got to do this across the board. You can't pick and choose how we want to apply this. So what were the results? This is super duper powerful. Students raised hell. That policy lasted 48 hours. They got rid of that policy 2 days later because mainly of the activism of the campus itself. Folks were not with it. They were not happy. I think a lot of them felt like you cannot pick and choose, right? And so they activated and they got the policy changed, right? So discussion point. This policy was rescinded within a very short time of it being approved. What do you think the precedent would have been set if it was not reversed? If they did not cave to student activism pressure? What do y'all think would have been the precedent that was set?
I think if they would have kept it, they would have silenced all students and like erased all kinds of diversity or self-expression. Just because like if students aren't allowed to express how they feel right and if students aren't allowed to express how they feel being on campus, then like they want you to be quiet. Like,
Exactly. So that's a perfect example, right? The precedent that would be set is institutions silencing students, period, like point blank, which we know is dangerous. We saw one of the quotes that the responsibility of the institution is to elevate that and protect that. So very, very, very good point. Thank you. Do you want to add something?
For me, what speaks very loud is that if they didn't reverse it, the university silences minority students. They don't silence white students. You can do anything. Like if they would have kept this knowing right after they did their activism, you're silencing black students. Not all students, but black students.
Black students. I think that's a really, really good point, and it speaks to the pick and choose portion, right, that they were talking about. If this was not reversed, then I think students who were protesting or felt a way about police brutality and enough to demonstrate about it, 100% would have been shushed, silenced. Basically, their voices would have been stamped out. And it also would set the precedent for other protests to potentially be accepted, right? Because it is leaning into that picking and choosing what's allowed, what's not allowed. Very, very, very good answer. What about now? Because they did reverse that policy, what has been the precedent? What's happening now because of that?
I think as a student athlete, now, like, it's okay to, like, you can have these conversations. Like, of course, like, within limits, but you can have these conversations with awareness, like, and not be afraid that could be retaliations for you, like, expressing, like, your opinion. But also, like, on campus, like, there's so many people, like, whether minority students, white students, like, everyone here is, like, okay to, like, or feels like it's okay to, like, express, like, their opinions. Like, I think with Charlie Kirk, everybody was expressing their opinion about why it was right, why it was wrong. Like, I think there was, like, protests, there was, rails, like, because they reversed it, students, like, do feel like it's okay, that they won't be retaliated against.
100%. That is very, very critical. It's not necessarily we're supporting one opinion or the other. It's really about supporting students and their ability to express themselves and doing so safely, right? Without repercussions or retaliation. That is a very, very, very good.
Troy, I just want to
Yeah.
add to that. When you use the word neutral, I just think it's important to say institutions are rarely neutral. People have already picked a side, and what's normal is the majority side, right? So when you talk about neutral, it really means not you, I mean, or not minoritized voices, right? And so to me, the reversal kind of showed that everybody's voices matter, that students matter, that what they think is important, and that we have to sometimes acquiesce to, their right. Not, I wouldn't say acquiesce sometimes, but I'm just saying, like in this situation, we're going to allow this protest to continue because it's the right thing to do.
100%. And to your point, Dr. Caldwell, when we think about neutrality or quote unquote non-involvement, there's no such thing. You're involved one way or another. But thinking about this concept of right to learn, we talked about student activism both on campus and outside of it. But what do y'all think the role of public universities is in engaging students in these current affairs conversations and these societal issues? And with that, if the institution is neutral, right, or non-involved, what does that look like? What does that mean as they support their students' right to demonstrate, protest, etc.?
I think
You said what is the
Yes. Yep.
university? Which is, I'm sorry, Madam, she goes.
oh, I'm sorry. I think there's a slippery slope to neutrality.
Mhm.
So not saying that you're neutral, you're not standing for me.
Right.
You're gonna have to.
Sure. Yeah, got to take a stance, right? Please go ahead.
I think it's just actually, we're at an institution of higher education, teaching them and supporting them while they exercise.
Yep.
Right. And so how you do that safely, or how you do that, what is the procedure, how you can look at policies for yourself to move forward, how you can take up an issue as a group of students. So helping them understand their rights in general and how they do that.
100%. You hit the nail on the head. The role of public universities is to teach. It is to equip their students with the tools that they need to succeed in society. If protest is a part of that, if demonstrations are a part of that, it is the institution's responsibility to teach you how to do that, right? And support you in doing so. The concept of neutrality or non-involvement is not about any of the issues. It's not about that at all. And I think a lot of times that is mistaken when universities or institutions are supporting student voices, whatever those voices are. The concept is neutrality, but really what they're doing is supporting students, right? That's not neutral. That is a dedication and a commitment to ensuring that students are able to use their voice. That's not neutrality. It's neutrality about the issues. We don't care about the issues. It's not what the institution's responsibility is to feel one way or the other about society. The role of the institution is to support students in figuring out what they care about, demonstrating, using their voices. And so neutrality, non-involvement is tricky because a lot of times folks think that means in relation to the issues. It's not. It's about supporting students to use their voices. I think that's a really, really important distinction. So when we think about all of these student movements, these student protests, there's a playbook of reaction to it, right? We typically will call this authoritarian backlash. And all of the examples that I gave earlier, if you get on Wikipedia or Google or start doing some research about student protest movements, you're going to see some common threads, right? You're going to see free speech suppression. You're going to see policing and increased surveillance on students. You're going to see things like passing legislation that actually cuts funding for DEI efforts and for race or gender studies. This is a big one that we're dealing with today, but threatening to defund universities that support diversity or allow student protests on campuses. And then deputizing the National Guard, which has resulted in the deaths of students, right? This is the playbook. This is how they react to students sharing their voices. This is a fact. We have examples. We have a history of this type of reaction. So what have we learned through all of these movements? What we have learned is that education is both theory and practice, right? At a higher ed institution, the role while you're on campus is to get that theory. But the institution's responsibility is also to support you in the practice, right? So as you go and demonstrate, or as you go into the community to speak to folks, it is the institution's obligation to support you and give you the tools to do it. Not about the issue or the concept or the topic, but the tools to be able to do it. We also know that activism is foundational to education and the college experience. This is where you learn yourself. This is where you find out what you care about. This is when you start using your voice, right? This is the first time you're not around your parents or your guardians. You're on your own. You can form your own opinions and you can say them out loud and find your peers that agree with you, right? This is the place where that exploration and that discovery happens. And activism is foundational to that. That is foundational to finding your voice and using it. Student activism not only has shaped campus life, higher education institutions, but also the country as a whole, right? We talked about the Vietnam War protests. We talked about the Black Lives Matters protests. We talked about the anti-genocide protests going now. Those don't necessarily have anything to do with any individual campus, maybe outside of the identities of some of their students, but these are concepts that exist outside of the environment or ethos of the university. But the student activism that happens on any campus can affect those things. And I think that that's one of the big lessons is that students are powerful. If students start feeling a way about something, look out. Watch out, everybody. And then also history teaches us to resist. We have an obligation that when unfair or unjust laws or policies exist, we have to fight back against them and change them or reverse them. And it's our responsibility to do so. We can't rely on maybe institutions to know what's best for people, right? And when they do pass things that maybe don't benefit us, it is our responsibility to push back against that. So we know that protests in and of themselves are not the only way to make change in the higher education system. I'm gonna go through a quick example, but I would love to hear some folks talk about what are some other ways we can make our voices heard outside of protests? What else can we do? This is my coffee break. Y'all talk. So like withdrawing your support or attendance, right? Yeah, that's a great example for sure. What else can we do?
You can try to talk to like higher ups or like administrators. Also just like have conversations with like minded or not like minded.
Yeah, having conversations, starting dialogue. I think that's a great thing. What I really loved about what you said was even with people that don't agree with you, right? So like your ability to start a dialogue and discuss. You might not agree at the end of the conversation, but the ability to engage in that conversation, I think, is very, very important. And it's a learning opportunity for everybody, right?
Exposing,
Exposing, say more.
like, social media, make sure you inform, uh, like, groups on campus, popular groups on campus.
Mhm.
Um, asked them to share, and now attention is on administration.
That's one of the, at Young Invincibles, one of the pieces of our definition of advocacy is educating stakeholders, right? And that's a huge deal, right? Just talking to people. Like, hey, did you know so and so and so and so this? Did you know that SIU student athletes are not allowed to protest if they're wearing a uniform? Did you know that? How do you feel about that? Right? Just starting the dialogue and exposing what's really happening. I'm sure that folks who were not student athletes may not have known that that was even a policy, right? I'm sure that that went directly to the student athletes saying, hey, y'all, this is what we're doing and don't do that. The rest of the student body might not have been aware, right? So it is responsibility of folks to, like you said, expose that information, share that information and talk about it.
Showing, going to the
Yeah.
where
Mhm.
these conversations are
Yes.
and advocating for themselves.
That is huge, right? Decisions are being made about students all the time, and it ain't a student in the room, right? So figuring out where those spaces are, showing up to those meetings, being involved, using your voices, very, very important. All right, I'm gonna do a little experiment and see what we come up with. I'm gonna try this again. This is the first time I'm doing this, so let's see. Let's say all of y'all are on campus all the time, right? You're here all the time. You have relationships, you have friends, you got classmates, you got peers, you got teammates, you got coworkers, right? All of these. What would you do if you saw that one of those people were hungry? What do you do? We got immediate answers, and I looked like you had like a clarifying question that you wanted to ask, but let's start here.
I suppose the context would matter, but I mean, I would just offer to give them food.
You would offer to get them food. Why would you do that?
It's like, great, I want somebody.
Hmm.
Like, if we're friends, like in this context, like if we're friends, like, hey, my friends, like, if I don't have it, don't be kind of like, I'll pay for them. It's kind of just like, it's just something you do when you care about people. Just because, like, again, if it was me, I'd want somebody to do that, even if we didn't. Like, it's about like kindness and understanding. It's also like making me feel like crap and letting me be free, especially if everybody else is eating. Like that's kind of like I don't know what the word like the proper word is, but that's kind of like weird.
Yeah.
Why would you do that to somebody?
It's kind of messed up, right? I think the important thing that you raised up is it's the right thing to do, right? That's really where we start. What else? What else would you do if you just knew someone was hungry? What do you do?
Identify resources.
Mhm.
Here at SAU, we have some peers, the Heroes Program, we have several different local. The, I think it's the church on Jackson Street. Kitchen.
Yeah.
There's a kitchen that they serve, I don't know if it's every day or. Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And also, William Lowe has, he's the executive director of Chamber of Commerce here in Hartville.
Mhm.
They have a program where you can actually, order online, and they have certain days you can pick up the food. So, find resources and take it. I don't know how they do the shit out of students now with like the link, the EBT cards.
Mhm.
So
Utilizing resources because it's the right thing to do, right? I would venture to say that those programs that you just started or that you talked about were probably started because someone found a hungry student, right? That was probably the reason why those resources now exist, right? Because someone encountered their peer and was like, yeah, that's messed up. We all eating. How come you're not eating? I'm sure that it was a student that said, this is not right. What partnerships can we create? How do we not only take this outside of our campus, but how do we also affect our community as well? And I'm nearly 100% sure that a situation like that is what caused a lot of those resources to exist now. And I think that's really important too, because this is another form of protest, right? This is students, young people, taking action against conditions that they find unacceptable. And the results, the community gets fed, Students get fed, programs are started, resources are available. I just want to impress upon y'all that student activism is very powerful, and it does not have to exist in just the silo of demonstrations or protests on campus. It's much, much bigger than that. So, at Young Invincibles and our Right to Learn campaign, there's 4 main pieces that we are incorporating in this and that we're leaning into to kind of bring awareness about the right to learn in general. We're starting with student leadership development. This is a perfect example. We have some students in the room, but we are really thinking about how do we train and empower students and specifically student leaders to lead these movements, right? How are we preparing them and equipping them with the tools to help facilitate change? That is one step. The next step is coalition building. So we need a bunch of people in the room. We cannot do it ourselves. We're thinking of institutions, organizations that exist at the institution already or in communities, and figuring out how do we come together, build resources, and provide opportunities overall to amplify our collective impact. Narrative change. This is something that's near and dear to Young Invincibles. We are a storytelling organization. And if you think about the media today, there is a narrative about student activism that exists today. Turn on Fox News or CNN or any news outlet that is covering a student protest, they'll tell you what they think about it. It's not hard to figure out. But we want to change that narrative. I think I spent a lot of time in this presentation talking about how powerful student activism is. So maybe let's try to change the narrative in a more positive light, like, hey, we should support that because it has resulted in great things for our society so far. So thinking about how we share these stories and talk about these different campaigns. And then last but not least, anybody that knows anything about pretty much any organization knows how important data is. So that's the next piece, right? Making sure that we're collecting both qualitative and quantitative data to figure out what people are thinking, what they're feeling, how they're reacting to certain concepts or terms. And then thinking about how do we utilize that to create long-term change. This is very much so tied into that narrative change piece. But we're thinking long term, right? Like in 50 years, I personally don't want a negative spin on student activism. In fact, I would love for supporting student activism to be something that higher ed institutions publicly state, right? That's a part of an evaluation of their campus and their campus life. But we can't do that without data. We've got to have some numbers. So we've got to figure that out. So we are doing some polling, some message testing, again, trying to figure out how long term do we affect this concept. Today, we are dealing with multiple threats simultaneously to not only democracy and higher education. So the poly crisis, there's a bunch of things going on at once. Also, I want to note that there's a bunch of things going on at once on purpose. That's intentional. It's not one thing at a time. No, it's a flood of problems, right? We're talking about assaults on civil rights, breaking down institutional autonomy, so controlling what institutions are able to say, what they're able to name their departments, what all kinds of things, right? Targeting of the right to learn and academic freedom is specifically attacks on things like critical race theory, gender and sexual orientation, DEI. All of these are being attacked right now. All of these threaten the tradition of student activism existing, thriving, and helping catalyze change for our society. All of these things are threatening that from not only the student perspective and threatening students, but all the way to the institutions themselves and threatening to remove funding or other supports if you are really actually supporting students in their voices. That's a lot, and we're dealing with it today. Not only students, but also institutions themselves, right? And this is why we kind of are doing simultaneously. It's the right to learn, but it's also the right to teach at the same time. That's the whole concept. All right, another coffee break time. Why do y'all think these attacks keep happening in higher education? It keeps going on. We went to 1766, y'all. And we also talked about some stuff that's going on today. So why? Why is this happening? Yeah.
Like what you said, student voices are important and they'll fight against it. And that's exactly what they want to.
Sure.
They'd rather be uneducated
Uneducated, I'm gonna steal that quote. Thank you. Yeah.
Kind of just to like piggyback off of the uneducated part. When people are uneducated or unconcerned, it's easier to control them.
Mhm.
Like
That's literally it. And if you think about what I just talked about, the threats to the higher ed institution itself, it then becomes in their interest to silence students. Like, we gotta protect our bread. Y'all can't be, y'all wild, right? Like that then becomes the perspective of the institution. But if we also reflect on what the role of the institution is to actually support and teach you how to do this, then now we have conflicts of interest that are existing, right? And so generally these attacks keep happening, just like y'all said, to stamp out people's voices, to create a scenario where resistance or dissent does not exist. And that is the reason. It's not higher education institutions themselves that are creating these threats or implementing these policies. They are reacting to what's happening at a higher societal level, um, and they're being reactive, right? But we also know that students can react too, and the power of student reactions um, at the same time with the institution, we know who typically wins in this fights, right? Students typically will come out on top. And if students are allowed to use their voices to demonstrate, to create change on campuses, and the higher education institution itself supports them in that, the higher education institution actually ends up benefiting and saving their autonomy, right? And their ability to actually support those students, which arguably is the whole job in the first place. So, next thing that I wanted to talk about is some brand new data, and I mean brand new, data about campus climate surveys across the SIU systems. I pulled out a couple of data points that I thought were really interesting and like relevant to this conversation. One of the things that we saw for the question or statement about faculty accept my points of view, even if they disagree with them. What we saw was about 66% of students agree or strongly disagree with that statement, and about 7% disagree or strongly disagree. So generally, students feel like, I can have my opinions. And it's okay if other people disagree with them. I don't feel shunned. I don't feel rejected or anything like that. 66% of the student base feels that way. I feel like that's pretty good. This next question, though, I think is very interesting when compared to that last one, right? This question or statement, again, the welfare of our institution takes precedence over donor demands, investment matters, and political views. These numbers have changed suddenly, right? Only 39% of students agree or strongly disagree with that statement, and about 18% disagree or strongly disagree with that statement. I want to get some thoughts from the audience. Why do y'all think that disparity exists? If you are allowed to express yourselves and your opinions and they are accepted, even if you disagree on campus at your institution, how does that, what's the relationship between that and the perspective of students and how the institution prioritizes certain things?
I do have one response,
Yes.
because we had this conversation a little bit yesterday,
Mhm.
and I think in some ways, the classroom can be one of the safer places. When you start dealing with external and the people, individuals, it's not as safe. Like, for example, you might have people who come on campus and they say things that are not really what the institution believes, but because of free speech as a law, we have to allow dissenting opinions, right? And to a student, they might think, why does somebody come on our campus and they get to talk about women, or they get to talk about the LGBTQIA community, or they get to talk about ethnic minorities, and the institution allows this? Well, it's not that we agree with it, but legally, again, it's about that position of neutrality. We don't get to decide, well, we like this and we don't like this. You can say this, you can't say that. We actually have to unfortunately make space, because there are people and students who agree with that person, even if we find their comments to be very offensive, but it's under the umbrella of free speech. And it can feel like that the welfare of the institution is taking precedence over you personally. But I just want to say, from my perspective, that's not the case. It's like we actually have to allow those opinions. So the classroom is safer, and sometimes external forces are not as safe.
100%. I think another, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Uh,
I'm sorry. Mhm,
There's
see y'all.
one question.
Mhm.
When you say the welfare of our institution, you mean how well we do as a whole, or how well the students do?
I think it's about the welfare of the institution. So,
Health of the institution,
yeah, so the
welfare.
health of the institution, its ability to continue to exist and service students, et cetera. Yes.
But I feel like there's kind of like a gap between like classroom staff, faculty, and then like administrators, like board, um, higher up people. I think I personally like, yeah, we see the chancellor, but as far as like other administrators, we don't even know that they exist, or like the board members, they don't necessarily reflect the population or the generations that are students. So I think that that kind of plays into why there's less people that actually agree just because there's a gap and I think it's apparent to students. And also like playing off what she said, like there's some opinions that you kind of not have to give into, but you have to allow just because like, well, we disagree, then there goes the funding or there goes the publicity or something like that. So,
That's a very, very good. I love that. I think another thing that we kind of discovered yesterday is like low key as a student, do you know what the donor demands are of the institution? Like, are you familiar? Do you know what the investment matters are for SIU as a system? Maybe not, but you might be exposed a little bit to political views, even just a perception, right? Or even just as you're walking the halls of the university, you might pick up on some conversations. So students might be a little bit more in tune to the political view portion, and I think that might also affect how this data came out. Because when I was a student, I don't even know if I knew what a donor demand was. Right? So like I was answering this question, it solely would have been about the political views portion. So that might have something to do. Speaking to those points about the difference between interacting in the classroom and on campus or with faculty, this next slide kind of pulled out those exact data points. What we see is students, 41% of students agree or strongly agree with the statement that they can openly express my political views on campus. So that means kind of in conversations with folks, maybe if there's a protest outside the student center, I don't know, but folks, about 41% of folks say that they can openly express themselves generally on campus. When we get into the classroom, it starts decreasing a little bit, right? 36% of students feel like they can express their political views in the classroom itself. And then when we go into those views being respected, not by staff, but by faculty, what we see is 40% of students agree with that statement. So what are these numbers telling y'all? I know it is telling me, but I want to hear your opinion. When we think about how students feel about their ability to express themselves on campus in the classroom, and then how those views are respected by faculty. What conclusions can y'all draw from that? Can I finally stop you? What conclusions can you draw from these data points?
I think this overall is the campus and faculty done a decent job for creating a safe space or a space for most students to feel. I feel as far as political views in the classroom go, I would say on campus it's pretty diverse as far as opinions go. So I feel like maybe the numbers are kind of a little bit lower there just because there are opinions that a lot of people agree with, and then there are students that have opinions that they know people aren't going to agree. So I mean, I guess that would go up for that. But I think like as a whole in total list data, I think that as far as SIU goes, it's been a pretty the campus climate is pretty decent as far as like it's almost half of campus feels.
100%. Are you gonna add something?
Yeah, I agree, but also maybe the difference between campus and classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Campus to me, when someone says, "Oh, are you on campus?" it's different when somebody asks, "Are you in class?"
Right.
Class is like a teaching environment. You're in class and doing schoolwork or whatever. Campus is like this is campus. I'm on campus. Then being in the SSB on campus, being like walking around on campus. So maybe people feel more comfortable when the space is smaller.
Mm.
And usually you're in a class where it's something you're interested in. So you tend to share, might have some reviews with people. For
Yeah.
example, if I was in the African studies class, I'm gonna feel more comfortable to talk about African studies things rather if I was I don't know, just like any other space. Yeah. So maybe that the difference between campus and class.
100%. I agree with you. And I also think that this data point is the reason why the Right to Learn campaign exists. Because what this data is telling me is not only do students feel less comfortable sharing their opinions in class, perhaps teachers are also less comfortable providing that environment for those students. And it has nothing to do with anything else other than the threat, right? The threat of autonomy. If you're a teacher, hey y'all, we not saying genocide in this class because I gotta pay some bills. Okay, right? That is an immediate restriction on your right to learn, right? But that's also kind of a forced environment that I don't necessarily think anybody would choose. And I think for students, the same thing kind of exists, right? There might be certain things in this classroom that I can't push or can't explore because maybe my professor has already said we're not doing that, or because of the other classmates that are in the room, I don't feel comfortable. Um, to me, this piece right here is exactly why the Right to Learn campaign exists, because it demonstrates the threat to not only students' ability to learn, but also teachers' ability to teach, and them having to make decisions with things other than the well-being and advancement of their students being a factor. Yeah.
And if I go into a classroom and a teacher says something, I'm like, I can't be comfortable sharing my
Mhm.
because whatever you just what she just said. For example, philosophy class,
Mhm.
he was like, oh, like you love drive bombs or whatever he was talking about.
Mhm.
Now I know how you think,
Right.
and I'm gonna.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's all about keeping your own safety in mind, right? Immediately thinking about, oh, I'm not gonna say what I think in this class. That's not.
He says a lot.
And the institution has to allow that person to say those things. They don't have to support it or like it or um, create an environment where the institution's views are aligned with that. But they do have to support those opinions and allow for that discourse and allow for the debate and allow for the students to be like, I don't like that. I don't agree. Or I like that and I agree. The role of the institution is to support the exploration of it, not to stamp out any one opinion or the other. So that's a really important,
I
important
just want to
thing that you-
clarify, I think it's different if the student says something like that compared to a professor.
100.
Students are on equal footing, but if you have a professor saying those type of things, they are the authority in the class, and they could set a totally different tone and meet those thought process. So I do think another teacher administrator should challenge that, which I would probably get more information.
For sure, for sure.
Curious.
Another thing too is if you're a student and you experience that, there's probably other students that experience that. I spent a lot of time talking about student activism. I'm not gonna say nothing else.
I think he has to. And you can't.
We should talk afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like going on to like she said, like teachers, also advisors. Like your advisors are there, like whether it's for RSO or actually like for your major, for your studies, like what your advisor says also kind of matters. And I feel like that also has an effect because once they say something, now you're kind of like, well, I don't feel like either one, you're discouraged from like pursuing that education that path, and also now I have to I can't exactly express what I'm saying. I'm just gonna go off what you say because you're not. So, yeah, whether it's like an advisor or actual professor. Certain comments about like their whatever. It's just kind of like
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you all for sharing that. And yeah, we should definitely talk afterwards. All right, I'm getting close to wrapping up on my slides. but I would love to kind of do a group activity with you all. So one of the things that we've learned, I talked a little bit earlier, is there's a playbook for reacting to student activism, right? That playbook typically, the tactics in that playbook typically falls into 5 categories, which would be controlling the narrative, defund and privatize, discrediting higher education, suppressing student power, and then divide and distract. Usually when I do this presentation, it's designed for like breakout groups, but we're a small enough group where we can kind of do this together. So we'd love for y'all to just shout it out. What are some examples of controlling the narrative? How is this tactic being used? Yes.
So I am a journalism student.
Sure.
So when not only well on the journalism side, who is writing the story,
Mhm.
but also on the other side, is these stories getting out? Like I can write something, but if it's not getting published, nobody's gonna know about it.
Right. It's like your diary.
Yes. And journalists are supposed to stay neutral. But if somebody is projecting into whatever they're writing, that's gonna show.
Sure.
And that changes the narrative. And like even photojournalism, the pictures that you take of I think a good example I was just watching in my class was a documentary about how some journalism or whatever, they were being attacked at Black Lives Matter
Mhm.
protest. And they were like, oh, I'm just here to get all the violence. That's because that's what you're looking for. You're
Right.
not getting people walking down, taking a knee, a moment of silence. You're getting people once they're agitated and like throwing stuff or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I think that's also control because you are pushing that out. You're not getting all sides. You're just getting this one.
Yeah. If the narrative is student protests are violent,
Mhm.
or protests in general are violent, and then I show you pictures of people doing violent things,
Mhm.
then that supports that narrative. That builds on that narrative. But if you
Confirmation.
confirmation bias, exactly. But if you show a picture of a bunch of people holding hands and chanting in
Mhm.
peace, that messes that narrative up. That's not sure. So a great example and really relevant when we talk about media, journalism, like that's a lot of control in terms of narratives that folks have. So excellent example. Thank you for that. What are some other examples of controlling the narrative? Yeah, back here. Mm.
Or, um,
But that is a good example though, right? Sometimes when folks are sharing information, they pick and choose which facts to share, which could help build a narrative, right? By speaking about certain things that exist and not talking about the opposite or the reasons why those things exist can 100% create a narrative. And yeah,
um, Trying to get ahead of a story, where something comes out, you have to come and try to go ahead and try to get ahead of it.
like control the folks' reaction to that information. These are examples of trying to control the narrative for sure. Let's go here and then I'll go back to you.
Perhaps like when people put out statements, like when universities put out statements, celebrities put out statements either about something that happened or something that is about to happen or just in support.
Mhm. Yeah, statements can help control narratives, right? It kind of declares what and anybody's whoever putting the statement out, what their stance is, and then could then potentially affect the followers or supporters of that group and how their opinion is. So that is another way to control narrative change. Did you want to add anything? You good? So controlling the narrative, there's a bunch of different ways that that can happen. I'll identify some examples. Defund and privatize. Y'all have some examples of this? I think the SIU School of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion is a great example. y'all know that there are campuses that exist that also decided not to change their name, that that department doesn't exist. That's the thing. Yeah.
I think, and I think now, like, students have, I don't think it's all black teachers in the arts school. Now, like, they don't have it at all, and, and they're not able to, like, they're not even able to name their event, like, black this,
Mhm.
like, drawing words can be used.
Yep.
And not allowing any to have they do the college.
100%.
It's kind of like another example about how the different universities. My sister, she goes to UT Austin, or she works there, and they closed down their Black History Center, and like they don't have like Black graduation anymore. Like they can't call it that, so they
Yep.
don't have the Black graduation anymore. At least on my campus, they don't have it. So that or just also like defunding like the scholarships, or like they're already like magical unicorns to find, but
Right.
right now it's even more like this mythical thing that a lot of people don't get, where it's even more competitive since there's not as many like opportunities.
Yeah, 100. You hit on both defund and privatize at the same time, even with scholarships, right? There's, I don't know if y'all know about this whole accreditation thing that is happening on the federal level right now, but this kind of speaks to privatizing education, moving away from the general public helping and controlling that to special interests controlling that. And then they're also doing that with the threat of defunding you if you do anything else. Like those things simultaneously happen.
And I just was thinking about both of them when you talk about the narrative. Like, if you look
Mhm.
now, the narrative is that people don't trust higher education. Higher education is no longer effective, and so now let's defund them, right? And specifically with DEI, the way they were able to threaten institutions like UT Austin and other places is that we will take away your federal funding. We won't allow you to offer student loans if you continue to do DEI, which actually makes it pretty impressive that SIU across the system that we still use not just diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also anti-racism. We actually actively use that terminology across our campuses, our board. To go to your point, even though they're not as visible, they've actually committed to continuing that. And that was right after President Trump threatened funding for DEI. The state has lost a lot of money fighting this administration, but we're in a state that's willing to stand up and fight. So I think that that says a lot.
100%.
So I have two little tidbits. Oh, it's about so discrediting. Yeah. So, and I'm not saying that some of it doesn't have merit, but like when you say that journalism is bad and like all of it is fake news, so you're you're telling the public not to trust journalism. So a story can be 100% facts, and you're not going to listen to it because our president is telling you that it's fake news.
Right.
Um, and also, this was on social media, but I seen a comment, and I don't think the person realized how they sounded. They said, "Oh, he commented on like a Republican woman, a young girl's TikTok.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, you will be Republican until you go to college.
Mm,
So she'll be Republican until she gets educated.
right.
So you're saying that you don't like, do you not realize that you're saying like, what you're saying?
Right.
So just like stuff like that, you're telling your kids if you go to college, you won't be akin to us anymore. Like
Right.
you'll be different and you'll be liberal, blue haired, and all stuff like that. Like that's. So I think that's kind of like how people discredit higher education.
I think I saw something about how, I don't know if it was the president or just policies or if it was a threat, but how some professions weren't going to be considered like professions, like
Yes.
nursing.
Yes.
I think I saw about like nursing, a lot of in the medical field, but just like regular majors and programs, they wouldn't be considered like professional degrees anymore, and how like it would be something different. But I was like kind of reading into it, but I kind of didn't want to like feed into like fear mongering that was going on, because I'm like, it's nursing, that's a profession, but just I guess it's discrediting higher education, but also privatizing it, because it's kind of just like well, it's being used as a tactic, one, to scare people and to not wanting to get higher education because, of course, they're not educated, you can control them, but also just it's discrediting higher education because it's like there's already a narrative about education, like it's not worth it, it's too expensive. But now you're saying, oh, my degree won't even be considered a degree or it won't matter. Now it's even further discrediting higher education.
Yeah, 100%. And then the other thing too is also related to some of the other slides that we talked, or other tactics that we talked about. Part of it is about the narrative, right? I just saw a study I mentioned yesterday. I just saw a study that said young people don't want to go to college. They want to be streamers, content creators, and entrepreneurs. But if you look at the sources of that data, they talk to like 15 people from like one state, right? Like it's not accurate, it's not realistic. What we also know is higher education is still the best way for economic mobility. It is still the best way to um, buy a house, right? It's still the best way to acquire wealth. It's still the best way. So the narrative that goes out to help discredit higher education helps support the ability to privatize it, specialize it, make it more exclusive, and also control what is happening there, right? So all of these things actually work together at the same time in relation. Same thing with suppressing student power. What's some examples of this? One of the examples that I bring up is there was a student at the University of Chicago that was leading some anti-genocide protests. Not only was that student arrested, they actually went missing for about 2 weeks after being detained. Right. So think about what that statement does to all the other students, let alone that person that went through that. All they did was let a protest on campus. It was peaceful, no violence or anything. But they did get arrested. They went missing for literally 2 weeks. Their family couldn't find them. The police wouldn't say where they took them or anything like that. If y'all know anything about Chicago Police Department, we have active black sites in the city where they disappear people. This is not, I'm not making anything up. That's a real thing. And so what do y'all think that does to the rest of the students who might feel the same way or were maybe about to go to the protest tomorrow, right? They're not going. I wouldn't go. Yeah.
International students too.
Yes.
Affected by this, like we have free speech in the country, but it's like when you're in this country,
Yep.
the impressions that you need to agree with, not just your other peers, but specifically the government, or whatever the government is in power. And if not, we're gonna basically have, taking your money and send you back to your country without a degree, and we're gonna suspend your education in this country. And so now, just part of the education compact that Trump proposes that people actually limit the number of international students from different countries, so they don't have even more influence outside of the government educating them. And one of the feathers in our cap has been diversity and how many diverse perspectives we can bring into one limit that.
100%. If y'all think that immigration has no effect on higher education, you're wrong. Go ahead.
Just 2 points. It kind of like sparks, but about the visas, like I have a friend, like there's something going on with like visas right now, where it's kind of like they're already limited to like the jobs, what they do like for school, like they have to get it approved, and like their program is already under tech, so I feel like that definitely is like suppressing student power because it's like now they're afraid, well, if I do anything wrong, like at the job or at the school, like they're gonna suspend my visa and I can't come back. But then also, um, I mean, I don't really see it as much anymore, maybe because people aren't like speaking out as much, but just like not regular, but like suspension, expulsion, um, just like the other things like that they do to students in general, like just disciplinary measures that are taken. It's kind of, I guess fear. Like
Yes.
it's feeling like fear. It's like people are afraid, so they're not.
My scholarship has a lot of undocumented students a part of it. It's with the Chicago 5 and City Chicago Schools. And a lot of students are scared because they can get like Hope Chicago is promising, free education for you and your parents. But with all that's going on right now, people are scared to apply to school. People are scared to talk about how this is wrong, like what's going on is wrong, because they're scared they'll get deported. So when you silence the people that it's directly affecting, we can't hear them. And that's exactly what they want. They're controlling the narrative. Who are we hearing from?
And also think about the impact that that has. You might target a student, an undocumented student with that. And the threat for that individual student might be what it is, but they got a whole family,
Family. They got
right? So like literally even me speaking to a reporter about this is wrong could affect my whole family.
Yeah.
Right,
I
so,
don't wanna
like,
talk about it, 'cause
We
it's
talk
not
about
just my life.
suppression, yeah, like it goes very, very deep. It's more than just feeling comfortable to say what you want to say on campus. It's a little bit deeper than that, more nuanced than that, right? All right, last but not least, divide and distract. This is one of my favorite ones, especially at a higher education institution. What are some examples of this? Yes.
We kind of already talked about it, but it's kind of like how it's a public crisis, how there's so many issues going on at once. They're attacking everything. I mean, DEI, the raising tuition, the other multitude of issues that are going on at campus that I'm just not aware of, or that I'm sitting here all day listening.
Mhm.
So just kind of like having so many issues going on at one time. Also, just they're putting they kind of are maybe promoting something else, more positive things, so like people like I don't know, maybe like a party or something special going on, some scholarship or something else like mainly positive. That like all the negatives are kind of just like okay, whatever, or not even reporting on the negatives. Period. It's like
So the divide, like the polarization in this country, is out of control. Like people cannot see beyond themselves. So it's just me. So you're not able to empathize with other people who aren't like you, other people who might be going through things. So that divide, like telling certain groups that this other group is bad, and like, oh, actually, to be frank, telling citizens that undocumented people are taking all the jobs.
Mhm.
That's dividing.
Great example.
Because that's exactly what they told like white people with black people that we were
Mhm.
taking all the jobs. You know what they did? They burned our town. And so like dividing us so we can't band together because we're better with numbers. Like they know that. We know that. Well, we don't know that. Well, some people don't know that. Let's put it like that. Some people don't know that. Since we're better with numbers and they don't want that. Like we're easier to control if we're isolated. If we think that it's only happening to us or whatever is going on doesn't concern us, then we're easier to control. There's a quote that I love: "The readiness in which the mind succumbs to the truth."
Mm,
And I think it hits on all of these points.
100%. Yeah. The divide and distract one. This one for me is one of my favorites because it's so insidious. It can look like so many different things. But also, if we think about the role of a higher education institution, this becomes really, really tricky. Right? The role of the institution is to allow students to express themselves, support them in doing so, give them the tools on how to do it. Right? If the higher education institution is under threat of defunding because they use the word black in the title of a room, they're not going to look at black students protesting the same way as even the counter protest to that, right? It's not going to be the same. That from the institution supports the division, perhaps unintentionally, right? They are covering their own selves. But if you think about it, that is division. That's creating division. Whereas if the institution is prioritizing the expression of students and equipping them to do that, then you could actually facilitate two groups that disagree having a conversation and maybe changing some minds. The establishment, the system does not want that. That's bad. Believe that they do not want people having conversations, having good faith discussions and dialogue. They much rather polarize people, keep them as opponents, make sure that they don't humanize each other, and keep them separate. Because then it allows for things like defunding and privatization. It allows those things to happen a lot easier. Let's go here and then here.
And I think another example of that in higher education is who are in what classroom.
Mm,
In a lot of Africana studies classes, there's only black students. And yes, it's black history, but black history is American history. So if you don't have any other type of students, no other type of students are learning this history. But in these opposite classes, you're telling these students a different thing. Well, it wasn't really that bad. But if going back to the advisors are telling white students or students of different races that they need to go sit in Black
And take
American
those
classes or a gender and sexuality class or Hispanic heritage class because they don't think that it's important. So when you learn, and that's kind of what they want. If we're able to learn and see each other past differences, then we'll be in together. So they're dividing us.
I guess something that I don't know, sparked in my head was also there's a lot of desensitization to like these topics, especially as far as like violence goes, but like stuff about different genders, races, or like negative events that are happening. Because like people have been seeing it for so long. Like I think I don't know, since elementary school, like I've been exposed to violence or just like negativity. Like I grew up in Texas, so like I mean, school shootings or shootings are always happening. Or just like, I mean, students are afraid to be at schools, like bomb threats, like police brutality, the immigration issues, like ICE, everything. Like people are so kind of like tired of seeing it and nothing being done to like stop it. So I feel like a lot of people are kind of just like, oh well, like there's nothing that I can do about it, which is like divide and destroy. Forgot the other things, but that kind of like sparked my head. So people are just, like, super desensitized. So like advisors, people are just like, it's not really that bad.
Right.
Like I mean, like everybody. But also, I kind of think something that like also it's like a side tangent, but I also just think that people don't think it's gonna happen to them, so they think that like they're safe. Like, oh, it's not happening to me, so why does it matter? Or it only matters if it starts happening to a certain group of people. Like I don't personally, I feel like I'll take ICE for example, or Black Lives Matter. Nobody's cared about it until like I think there's a white woman in Minnesota who got shot. Like then everybody was like, oh, ICE is bad. Like we need to do something about it. But it's been happening to Hispanic people for years. Nobody cared. Or like Black Lives Matter. Nobody cared until I can't remember who. Like it was a person. It was George Floyd, but there was another, like, they didn't really care.
To like Kyle Rittenhouse shot.
Yeah, until like something else happened to another race. And yes, George Floyd, because they exposed it. And like a lot of people, I think more races were getting involved, but also just like nobody cares until it happens to somebody like that they care about. And so I think that's like a really big, I guess, divide and distract. I guess people are distracted. Or they just don't care because they're so desensitized.
That desensitized point is, I think, huge. Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, Laquan McDonald all happened before George Floyd, and it was the same situation, right? But the activism or the attention was different in that situation. That's a very, very, very good point. All right, let's move into our very last kind of group discussion. This is for everybody in the room, students, admin. I'm assuming everybody here has been to college and sat in a college classroom before, right? So we're not going to take 20 minutes to do this, but I just want y'all to think and reflect about a time where you felt free to learn, when you were able to speak your mind and explore ideas. Maybe you didn't have an opinion formed yet, but you felt safe in exploring that opinion. I want you to think about what made that feeling of comfort possible. Who made that feeling possible? And how did that impact you? What did that do for you? How did that help formulate your opinions? How did that change you in your thought process? Let's maybe take a minute or two to just kind of think and reflect, and then we'll let folks. As soon as you sound like you're ready, you ready. Let's go. Let's do it.
Sorry, I don't know. I used to do speech and debate, so it's kind of
Okay.
used to like having something
Yeah.
ready to go.
Yep.
But I think here personally, I took an ethics class and I honors contracted it, but I took an ethics class with I think it was Douglas Anderson. And we were talking about Socrates, but he was kind of just like, you need to question everything. Like, and personally, like he was saying like all kinds of things. Like he was like, well, why do we eat like cows, but we don't eat dogs and cats?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, like everybody was like, it's wrong. He was like, well, how's it different?
Right.
He was like, why? And then he was talking about like, he said he has a bunch of things. He's like, you need to question it. Why is it right? Like, why is it taught to walk on the right side of the road or drive on the left side of the road? Why is it okay for like, just he really pushed that we need to question everything. You don't have to accept like what people throw at you or what exactly it is that people say to you. And then he was kind of just like, you know, knowledge is there. It was really like the whole class. We talked about Socrates, we talked about Confucius, we talked about like um, Genghis Khan, a whole bunch of theories and just like a whole bunch of things that was kind of just like um, basically Socrates. We talked a lot about Socrates. Socrates' main point was to ask questions. And to educate people, you have to ask questions. When you do wrong, you ask them why. And in order to get them to do right or to do better or to like hear their soul, basically get to Epimelestein, like you have to heal the soul and to ask questions and learn. So I guess my professor made that experience possible. And I mean, it impacted me to like do research. I did a research project about the connection between holistic care and medicine, food. I did medicine, food, and education because people, I call it the care more than we realize because like we really do. Like, I mean, like in medic and the healthcare field, like you have to care in your food, the way that you cook, the way that you sit down, the way that like you talk to people, like you care. And like a lot of people, like they don't realize that they care. So I mean, I guess that's just how it impacted me. Just,
No,
I'm
I
really
think
grateful to that class.
that is 100% amazing. That is, I couldn't have picked a better person to start off with an example because supportive professors 100% is one way that this is allowed, that this works. Um, one of the like common like entertainment and TV and movie tropes is about little tiny kids asking why and it being super annoying. But why? But why? But why? Because they're curious. They want to know. They don't know nothing, right? They're very actually curious. And so to have quote unquote adults or professors help facilitate that, right? Like encourage you to ask why, even about the most basic things, I think is very, very important because, like you stated, it allows for as a student to be like more curious, like, why are we doing that? Why is that this way? And then what it also allows for is the ability to think about it, process it, and maybe improve it, right? All of those things, asking why, encouraging folks to ask why, all of that is a threat to established things, right? You should not be questioning this works. It's been working for 150 years. This is what we're doing. But why? Maybe it could be better. Maybe we can help more people, right? So those questions are very, very important. And to facilitate a space where those questions are encouraged, absolutely. Yeah.
So my experience, I talk about Africana studies a lot.
Mhm.
I think it's really cool. And one of my favorite professors, Father Brown, he has this quote, who determines the terms in which we live?
Mhm.
And then like a follow up, if you don't determine them, they will determine you to extinction.
Yeah.
If you don't question, if you don't ask why, you're not one a part of the conversation. Two, you're allowing for things to just happen to you. So that quote I also said earlier, the readiness in which the many succumb to you. You're not asking, you're not exploring, or reading anything. So I don't know, you're just allowing experience people to control it, dictate that. And I believe that's what's wanted in this current climate for people to be too scared to ask or like not concerned. So I think being in Father Brown's class and being able to ask why, being able to discuss, or like, oh, this is something I heard, but I'm not quite sure, and being able for somebody else to respond, not just him, because it's open conversation, it's open dialogue, being able to learn and hear from one another is, I think, a time I feel truly heard.
So another question that I have for both of y'all is how do you think those,
Yeah, I got this one too.
okay, all right, all right. I'll talk to y'all afterwards. I think that was actually my last. All right. So, thank y'all so much. This obviously was a captivating conversation. We ran out of time, but I really appreciate all of your perspectives. I will follow up with y'all afterwards, but again, thank you all for having me. I appreciate this opportunity, and thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank you.
I want to, let's give it that one more time. That was very powerful, engaging, dynamic. When you ask the question, share a time, this is the time. So thank you for providing that space. We can actually say today was the time when we were able to freely discuss ideas. I feel like the students will pay you guys later. No, you all were, we really appreciate you all being here as well. I want to acknowledge our president, our assistant presidents in the room with us, Dr. Dan Mahoney. So we definitely are honored to have him here even more so for the conversation that follows. So right now, we're actually going to take a break. We have lunch provided, we have sandwiches, some Chick-fil-A, water, snacks. So we highly encourage you to feel free to please join us. Troy is going to be here. We have a lot of administrators in the room. You have President Mahoney in the room. And so we want to continue this dialogue on students' right to learn, but we also want to talk about equitable funding that equally impacts our student body. And I can't think of a better person than President Mahoney to be here to really kick that conversation off at 1 o'clock. He was a commissioner and really from day one has been instrumental in helping add to the formula, design the formula, and just really ensuring equity for all students across the state. He's testified in front of the Illinois Senate as well as the House about why it is so important that we have an equitable funding formula model in the state of Illinois. And so we're going to get to hear from him as an expert. We're going to have the partnership from College Completion come, Mr. Mike Abramson, and he's also going to share some very concrete data on just the importance of equitable funding formula. So if you all are not familiar with that initiative, it's going to impact you, and it has impacted you, because I always say we don't want you to just come to SIU, we want you to graduate. And so some of the things you're going to learn is about really affordability. So again, if you can stay, if your schedule permits it, we invite you to be at our 1 o'clock session too. But again, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your engagement, and please join us for lunch. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Sheila Caldwell, and I serve as the Southern Illinois University System Vice President for Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's conversation of understanding here, and we're on our Carbondale campus, and we want to thank them for their hospitality today. Today's conversation is a part of our continued partnership with the Young Invisibles, as well as the Partnership for College Completion, to engage students in meaningful dialogue about their rights, experiences, and the policies that shape higher education. Across our campuses, students have advocated for improved student life, campus safety, addressing tuition increases, dismantling discriminatory policies, and ensuring a more inclusive and representative curriculum. These conversations of understanding are designed to center your voices and create space for informed dialogue and action. In today's conversation, this afternoon is specifically about the equitable public funding formula. And before we kick it off with the Young Invincibles, as well as the Partnership for College Completion, we are in for a treat. I would like to now invite SIU System President Dan Mahoney to the stage, who is a very knowledgeable leader and has really been a pioneer and architect for the equitable funding formula from day one. He served on a commission for approximately 3 years. He has had the opportunity as an expert leader to testify in front of the Illinois House and Senate on the importance of equitable funding formula to advance student success for all. So President Mahoney, thank you for being here. Welcome your comments.
Well, thank you, Vice President Caldwell. And I'm just going to give a really quick and brief overview of how we got to this point. So there was actually legislation, it's been about 4 or 5 years ago now, that created the Adequate and Equitable Funding Formula Commission. We're charged to come up with a formula that would focus on equity and be grounded in equity. And I should point out from the beginning that that is different than any other public funding formula that exists in the country right now. I don't know all of those formulas, but I have not seen one that focuses on equity the way that what we have proposed does. So when you're creating something that's never been done before, that's an additional challenge, because we're not following somebody else's model. And we did look at these other models, but I think all of them had some of the issues and concerns I've had with. Many of them were more what's called performance-based funding, which gives more money to the institutions that are performing well. And it's pretty easy to see what that does. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and it doesn't actually help student outcomes, and it doesn't stay grounded in equity. We met over several years. We debated. I think one of the questions before our lunch today was, when did you feel you comfortable speaking up on an issue? I don't know if I felt comfortable, but I certainly spoke up on many things as we were putting together this formula to try to get it to a point where I felt comfortable saying, yeah, this is the model that I think will work for Illinois. This is the model that will work for SIU, but most importantly for all of our institutions. And over, again, several years of work, I think we've gotten to a model that I feel really good about, that does what it was designed to do, what we were charged to do, which was to base this on more of an equity model. And just to kind of what it does do is it really looks at what resources do you need given the population that you have. So what is your adequacy target? What given the population? So it looks at the socioeconomics of your population, all of those different factors that go into who do you teach at your institution and what type of resources do you need, and grounded that in research. So what is it we know based on research we've done help support students, and different students need different types and different levels of support. It also looked at the missions of institutions, and that helped to determine what the adequacy target was. So for every institution, there's now an adequacy target. And this says state appropriations, or I should say overall, we need this amount of money to fulfill our mission. Then it looks at what we have. And that's really a combination of what the state provides for us, so state appropriations, and what we have from net tuition revenue. So what are resources? So let's say our adequacy target is 400 million. Maybe we have 300 million, which means our adequacy gap now is 100 million. So now we know how much money each institution needs in order to, again, fulfill its mission, teach the student body that they have, which again differs across each institution. And the goal is to, over many years, we're not going to get $100 million next year, that over many years that they would fill in, for example, an institution that has a $100 million gap, they will fill in that gap over several years, and each institution will get more. The proposal as it is in the bill would provide more funding as well to institutions, and no one loses funding. So no institution loses anything, everybody gets additional resources, and if it's fully funded, we get more additional resources than they currently get under the model that we have today. I am a strong advocate of this. Again, we put a lot of work to getting it, quote unquote, right, and I think that this does it. And it is, back to what I talked about at the beginning, it's the first of its kind. There is no other state model that does what we do in our formula. And I think it can be not only positive for the state of Illinois, I think it can be positive for the country as a model that other states could follow to really base funding much more in equity, which again, just simply has not happened traditionally in higher education. So that's the broad overview. And I think I'll turn it over to who's up next. You're back up next. So we'll turn it back over to Vice President Caldwell, but thank you very much.
Thank you, President Mahoney. I want to say on behalf of SIU, and I don't think it's a stretch to say the state of Illinois, we're very grateful for your insight into this topic, and also for persevering and pushing this, because it's very meaningful for the state as well as our students. So again, thank you for your service and your continued advocacy. Much gratitude for that. Now I would like to reintroduce Troy Alleyne. For those of you who were not with us this morning, I do want to encourage you, really implore you, to check out our system YouTube channel. These sessions are being recorded as our April Conversation of Understandings. And so if you missed it, I think you would definitely benefit, enjoy, and profit from Students' Right to Learn. So that will be on our system YouTube page for the system. And we would encourage you to please check that out. This conversation is also being recorded for continued professional development as well. And so Troy Alleyne serves as the engagement manager in the Midwest Regional Office of Young Invincibles. He leads the region's engagement efforts, including the Young Advocates Program and Youth Advisory Board. He brings nearly a decade of experience as a community organizer and activist, having worked with organizations such as the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, BYP 100, and Chicago Votes. He is also the founder of Pod Lab Studios, an innovative podcast network and media consulting business. So as we begin our next session, I would like to invite Troy. And again, for those of you who are watching on our system YouTube channel, thank you so much for joining us. And we want to officially welcome Mr. Mike Abramson to this conversation as well, as another expert leader, specifically from day one, focused on advancing equity with the public funding formula. So Mike, thank you for being here as well. And Troy, you're up next.
Thank you. I'm going to be very, very brief because there's a much better expert here than me to be talking about this stuff. But the Coalition to Transform Higher Education Funding is a coalition of advocacy organizations across the state of Illinois that are invested in the higher education well-being of Illinois students. Our two main things that we are working on right now is the MAP grant, so Monetary Award Program, which is the state of Illinois' need-based aid program. We are working on expanding that. And then obviously, as President Mahoney just talked about, our equitable funding formula in the state. I could tell you generally what that is, how it works, so you all might leave a little bit informed. But Mike can tell you and make sure y'all leave as experts. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to the Director of Policy and Research, right, at the Partnership for College Completion, Mike Abrahamson. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Am I sharing my screen also?
Nope, I got you. 1 second.
Oh, there you go. All right, and we can go to the next slide. We can talk about investment in higher education in Illinois, or lack thereof. So basically, around the country, we don't think of the last 30 years as being particularly good for states investing in higher education. There's actually been a lot of difficulties around the nation. However, actually in the next one, when we go to these charts, here we go. But if you look at the top left here, we're looking at this left chart at the percentage of state revenues that states spend on higher education. Around the nation, that's floated over the last 30 years around 15%. So states spend about 15% of their whole revenue on higher education. Illinois, it used to be around there, right? We peaked around 13% in the mid 90s. Now that has declined such that we now spend just a little over 2% of our state revenue on higher education. So we have almost completely disinvested in higher education. For universities like SIU, you can see all of our public university appropriations on the right. That's that blue bar that just keeps going down and down, right? You can also see the budget crisis there, pretty pronounced, but basically we spend about half of what we used to on our public universities. And the orange line shows tuition at our public universities over the last 20 years or so, and how that more than doubled. One other thing I will point out, however, is if you do look at the last 5 years or so, and you can see this downward trend in university tuition. And if you kind of eyeball investment, it's been pretty flat over that time period too. Basically, our public universities, even just seeing level investment, they've been working as hard as they can to keep tuition low, and we have seen tuition lower. However, if you look at what that tuition used to be, tuition is still unmanageably high for far too many students, and we're pricing thousands and thousands of students out of our universities who have no choice other than to raise tuition to make up for what the state no longer funds. On the next slide, you can see a little bit more granularly how that looks for Illinois. So basically, around the country, the average is about $10,000 for tuition and fees at public universities. Illinois, that's more like $15,000. It's a pretty large gap. And for the average Illinois household, they would have to spend about 20% of their household income to cover public universities. And that is the 6th highest of all of our states. All of these figures are actually not as bad as the 2010s, which saw Illinois be essentially the 2nd most expensive state for low-income students going to regional universities. Over that time period, we had the greatest enrollment declines of any state in the country. And those enrollment declines were entirely concentrated at our regional public universities. So basically, we disinvested. Universities had to raise their prices, and we priced out more students than any other state in the country. On the next slide, you can see what that looks like in terms of serving students, right? So I've been talking about access, how many students are going and what they're paying. But we also know that we have to serve students, and that underrepresented students, we need more resources to ensure that those students can persist and graduate. What we see is the opposite of that. So here you can see two example universities, University A and University B. So we've made them anonymous, but as you can probably guess, University A is one of our Research One institutions that have a lot more resources, and University B is one of our regional universities that have a lot fewer resources. And rather than having getting more funding from the state and being able to spend more on academic and student support spending, our regional universities, University B, you can see here, has about a third as much as University A to serve its student population. So the institution with more resources that enrolls far lower percentages of students of color and students from low-income backgrounds has 3 times as much to spend per student on academic and student supports. This is backwards, and it's the result of our inequitable funding model. So you heard President Mahoney talk about this new adequacy-based model. On the next slide, I want to talk to you about what model we currently have. And this is actually the easiest slide to present because we don't have any model. We don't have any at all. We just give out money based on whatever we given it out last year, usually plus or minus a couple percent, usually minus. So we say, hey, you got 20% of the funds last year, you get 20% of the funds this year, and oh, by the way, there's probably a little bit less funds to give out. We don't have any formula, there's no rhyme or reason we can point to for how we do that. It doesn't take into consideration the different student populations institutions have, their different missions, anything like that. There's no system. But also, even with the lack of system, the way we currently distribute the funding, so I'll refer to that as across the board generally, because we just have this way of distributing funding and we give out more or less across the board. Right now, 2 of our universities split 52% of all that funding, and the other 10 universities in our state split 48% of our funding. Those 10 universities, again, as I mentioned, are the ones that tend to enroll greater percentages of students of color and students from low-income backgrounds. So this is backwards. So what is the solution? Well, President Mahoney started to talk through this, so did some of the heavy lifting for me. But basically, when we embarked on this process, we looked at we wanted to find a model that's adequate, equitable, and stable. And I believe, as President Mahoney mentioned, we achieved those 3 things with this model. So adequacy, this model is based on what institutions actually need to serve their students. Equity, it includes the funding needed in order to start to narrow and ultimately eliminate disparities that we see between student groups. And stable kind of speaks for itself. But there's one other element here too. I'm going to talk about substantial increases for our colleges or for our universities in the state. Along with that, we need to have accountability and transparency that ensures that additional funding is going toward the best practices, towards what can actually get more of our students to and through college. So how does it work? Well, it's complex, but I'll explain it as simply as possible. And again, President Mahoney kind of went over this too. Basically, what we first did was calculate how much do we currently spend on our students. So we looked at 6 different factors of expenditure. So spending from institutions, including how much are we spending on core instruction, academics services, student support services, everything from that to academic or to operations and maintenance. We looked at all of those factors, and then we looked at the research. That'll be a common through line. We looked at the research and said, how much more do we need to spend in order to increase our graduation rate as a state from 63% at our universities to a benchmark of 70%? So we calculated the additional funding each university would need to, as a whole, work toward that benchmark. But we also know, as I mentioned, we have disparities between subgroups, right? So, for example, higher income students graduate at higher rates than lower income students, and we know from the research that we need funding to make up those gaps. So this model also looks at the unique population at each university and calculates what it would need to start to close those equity gaps. You add up what they need their adequacy spending to raise those graduation rates and equity spending to make up the difference for student populations, and you have a target that we want to get to for each university. Then we have to talk about how much resources do they currently have. Well, to figure that out, we looked at 2 things. First, as President Mahoney mentioned, there is a hold harmless in this model. No university gets any less funding than before the model was in place. But all of that funding is money that universities can and do spend on their students. So we should calculate that. So we do calculate that as part of their resource profile. Then it gets a little bit trickier because tuition and fees are resources that universities have and use, right, to serve their students. But we don't want to just say, hey, SIU, you had to collect this much from your students last year, so we expect you to collect it every year, because then we'd be baking in the very inequities that we're trying to solve for. Instead, what we do is we look at, again, the unique population of each institution and use that to calculate what we reasonably think we can collect from each student body. So that goes into the resource profile along with the money they get from the state already, and then you subtract what we need, the adequacy target, from what we have, the resource profile, to get the adequacy gap. We have an adequacy gap for each institution. We add those up all together, and we get a $1.7 billion additional annual ask, which is a lot of money. We understand that it would bring us back to kind of in the same around what we spent in the early 2000s on our public universities, but I'll get more into the actual dollar amount of the ask later. So there's one other important thing. So it's not just you divide up this $1.7 billion, because we don't think that we're going to get all $1.7 billion next year. Unless you all know something that I don't around revenue, we're going to have to ramp up to that over 10 to 15 years. So it really matters. Let's say you get $135 million, which is what we're asking for in the next year for the whole system, additional funding. How you divide up that additional $135 million really matters, right? There are universities that are in far greater need, of those funds. And so how do we triage that funding to the universities that need it? Well, we look at their adequacy gaps. I mentioned each university has an adequacy gap. That's a number that they need to get to be at adequacy. There's also a percentage, right? If you need $100 million and you have $50 million in resources right now, then you have a 50% adequacy gap. We look at the number and the percentage, both of those things, and for each university, and that determines how we give out that $135 billion for each year. That's the whole model. And now you can see the results of that here. Basically, each bar represents a university, and the blue in the bar is the current resources they have. The orange is the adequacy gap, which also means how much funding they would get if we funded this whole model next year. And below it, you can see their percentage that I was just mentioning. So our universities range from being at 46% of adequacy to 89% of adequacy. As you can see, we've got most of our universities all of our universities are below 100%, right? No universities at or above adequacy, which that again speaks to the hold harmless. We don't want to just redistribute funding all your universities currently get, because we believe every university needs more, but some universities have a far greater adequacy gap than others. Something else you'll notice here is, just looking at these orange bars, is that every university benefits from this. We have been hearing a lot, maybe you've heard too, if you've heard about this formula, that some universities might or are claiming that they would be hurt by this model. However, if you look at it, all universities benefit. And I'll just say University of Illinois, because you might be reading about these op-eds. You can look at the University of Illinois campuses and see hundreds of millions of additional dollars that we are advocating for that system, along with the other universities, to get hundreds of millions of more dollars every year. And so as you can see, this model not only has a hold harmless, but as it gets funded, will greatly benefit all of these universities and their students. And we need that. On this next slide, you can see really a simpler picture of why. And that's our state used to, and not a long time ago, this is fiscal year 2008, our state covered 75% of our university's costs, and students were only asked to make up 25%. That's pretty much flipped. So now the state only covers 35% of what universities need, and students have to make up 65%, the vast majority. This would turn this around so that students would cover 40%, the state would cover 60%. It's not going to get us all the way back to where we were in fiscal year 2008, despite the price tag. It's getting us to 60-40, but that's exactly what you see around the country. It will make us, it will have us no longer be an outlier in terms of how little we spend on our public universities. Okay, the next slide might be a little bit hard to see. But basically, you can see here in a table, this underlies how every university benefits. On the far right, this is the increase that we were asking that the model would have provided this year for every institution if it had been passed and been funded. On the far left is what we've been kind of the status quo is. So for people who are saying we shouldn't do this model, they are arguing for this status quo. And as you can see, if you compare the universities on the far right to the far left and how much they're getting, every university greatly benefits from this. If we look at the Southern Illinois University system, the model says that they should have gotten $24 million this year. The status quo would have given them $6.6 billion, or million dollars rather. So a fraction of what the model says that SIU campus needs or SIU system needs just for this next year. But I'll go one step further and say the 3% status quo increase in and of itself, it's designed to be like, oh, we'll just get an adjustment for inflation. And yet what we're not talking about is that's totally unrealistic. We have never in recent history seen regular status quo across the board increases for institutions. We've only seen cuts. We looked at the best 5 of the last 10 years, and even that only averages out to about 2% increases every year, which is less than inflation. So really we're not really thinking about the far left, right? The alternative to the model we're suggesting is more the middle column, which is what we got last year, which was a 1% increase for institutions. So to put that in perspective, again, Southern Illinois should have gotten $24 million. That's what the formula calculated last year. Instead, as a system, it got $2 million, less than inflation. It's essentially disinvesting from campuses. So you can see exactly how much this benefits all of our universities. When you get a chance, you can dive into that data and look here. I'm sure we'll be sharing the presentation. This next area is something that I'm really passionate about. I'll try not to get too sidetracked on it, but it's really important. It's accountability. President Mahoney mentioned performance-based funding models. I could go on for a very long time about issues with those performance-based funding models. Some of the true innovation of this model that would make it first in the country is how we solve for some of the issues that we've seen across the country for funding models that are performance-based. And basically what it boils down to is this model's accountability. It is both good for taxpayers in that it will show in detailed plans and transparent data exactly how universities are planning to and spending this money and how that translates to outcomes. It will hold that, and it's good for students. It will hold the institutions accountable for making institutions more accessible, more affordable, and improving outcomes. It will do that in a way that doesn't that still allows them to get the funding they need to actually improve those enrollments and outcomes throughout. And it does it in a holistic way. So it will have committee of experts who will review institutions' plans, spending data, and outcomes to determine basically, are we on the right track? And if not, what corrective actions can we have? And if not, there are real corrective actions in this legislation. So the last slide on affordability, I'll just say that a lot of the time what we hear is on accountability is graduation rates, right? We want you to, if we're giving you all this additional money, we want to see graduation rates improve. Fair enough. But we look at graduation rates in terms of 6 years, right? Your 6-year graduation rate, you can't give someone a lot of extra funding and say, expect a 6-year graduation rate to turn around in 6 months, because it literally takes years. What you can do is say, okay, we're giving all this additional funding. How are you spending it? Then the model asks, okay, you're spending in this way. How are you making it more affordable for students in a more equitable way? Then you can say, okay, your university is more affordable. How are we turning enrollment around and building back enrollment? And then finally, at the end of all of this, once we have built toward adequacy over years, we can say, all right, how are we turning around our outcomes in a true way for our students? And in that way, we get at accountability and transparency in a way that Illinois never has before. And again, I don't think it's ever been done around the country. So the final thing that I will leave you with and then open it up for questions, and I'm very happy to field any questions, is that this $1.7 billion additional annual investment, we conservatively estimate that it would lead to, by the 15 years we're fully funded, we'll have 15,000 more graduates every year from Illinois. That means that just by the time it's fully funded, we'll have 122,000 more bachelor's degree holders in Illinois. Those people will together contribute $700 million more to state tax revenue than we otherwise would see. We'll also save $160 million just from those graduates in terms of Medicaid costs and SNAP costs and the cost of incarceration. Those graduates will spend $5.3 billion more in their local economies and also contribute $340 million to local taxes. So suffice it to say, the jobs of the future largely, the good jobs of the future largely will go to bachelor's degree holders. And this is a game changer in terms of making sure that those degrees are accessible and affordable to large portions of the state population that currently don't have access to those. We get asked all the time, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for this? The real question is, if we don't, how will we pay for anything in the future? Because this is the future of us having an inclusive and robust economy for Illinois. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the room? I think Mike can hear you too, so you can just ask the question.
I just want to make sure I heard him correctly. Did he say that SIU was supposed to get $24 million and we only got
Yeah, I think Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, under the proposed formula, SIU would have gotten 24 this year. The actual number was closer to 2.
The whole system, though, not.
The whole system, yeah.
Yes. Sure.
Okay.
Not
Okay.
SIUC, but the whole
Okay.
system.
The whole system,
Yeah.
correct.
But that's true, but that's also not like full funding. That is what in 1 year the progress we should be making to get toward full funding for the SIU system.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if it was apparent, but with this funding or with this like plan, how is it, like even if the SIU systems were to get the funding, how is it going to be ensured that the students are actually going to get it as opposed to like whatever else needs to be funded?
I heard most of that question, but could you repeat it?
Basically with the funding, if this plan were to happen, how or what's the plan to ensure that the funding will be distributed to the students instead of like, or what's the guarantee that the funds will go to the students as opposed to like it being redistributed to something else of the campus needs?
It's a great question. Okay. And this is like, again, an area that I'm super interested in too, because just to like, from a policy angle, you really have to be careful here because we absolutely need accountability and transparency, but you also have to think about what the state is, what is good and not good to have in a formula. And you want to have the balance between having meaningful accountability and not doing like micromanagement of funds that you want your university to do this or that. So I think that this strikes a really good balance there. There's still a lot to figure out, but the bones of it are in the legislation. And basically, universities would make plans along with state agencies, and I think should have public input as well, or at least student staff input, et cetera, into these plans that they often already make in terms of how they will achieve their goals. But what they will spend additional funds on. And then we're going to have reporting that we've never seen before to say, okay, this is what universities actually spent their money on. And then we'll have more in-depth data on outcomes that's connected to this than we've had in the past too. So right now, if the state gave an extra $20 million to SIU, I mean, it would be great, but there wouldn't be anything necessarily that we could directly say on the state level, okay, this is what it was spent on, this is what the outcomes of it were. we would get that data. It's in the bill to have that kind of transparency and reporting and data. And then there's a committee called the Accountability Committee that would review their all of this data along with the goals that they have to ensure that they're actually achieving those goals. So basically, if SIU got all of this additional funding and they knew a need was to hire more academic counselors, because right now, let's say professors are doing a lot of that work and students are having difficulty making appointments, et cetera, we would see in the data that they've used this money, they've hired this many additional counselors. Then, the university itself could drill down to say, with these additional counselors, we've been able to get students to have this many more credits, which have allowed them to proceed toward graduation, et cetera. If it said SIU, got a bunch of new climbing walls or whatever, then I think that would also show in the data, and then they would have to answer to a holistic accountability committee, as well as state agencies and legislators. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Do you want to access follow-up?
it does. There's no, well, I guess my thing is as far as like funding, because like, yes, you can get more credits and yes, you can have more counselors, but how are students with the graph or with what I saw, like if it's already more expensive, like getting these counselors or the climbing wall or whatever, like the problem, I don't, like, yes, resources are there, but also if students don't have money to pay for it to begin with, how is this benefiting? Like,
Yes.
if that's what the point
You
is.
said, how's it gonna make it more affordable for you to?
Yeah, like there's more counselors, but like you have to, like you can't even talk to a counselor if you don't. Well, I mean, you can talk to the advisor or the counselor all you want, but if your balance isn't below 1,500 by enrollment dates, you can't enroll. So
Yes.
how is that? Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. It's a perfect question to ask. Yeah. And I should have talked about affordability too. So part of this is also ensuring that institutions are equitably like making their universities more affordable to students, which like if you talk to administrators and presidents, like it's what they want to do. But ultimately, if the state is funding 10% of what they need to, then universities either have to raise tuition or there's a lot of things beyond just that the number of tuition, right? Like how much we're getting out in student aid, et cetera. One of the main things when we talk to institutions about what are you going to spend the additional money on, one of, if not the first thing they say is student aid, because universities have far better knowledge and data than anyone else would have outside about which of their applicants and students actually need more. It's just a matter of do they have the resources to support them or not. So that's a really long-winded way of saying, well, yes, the additional money means that institutions can and would keep their prices lower to students, both in terms of the tuition amount, but then also what they end up paying out the door in terms of institutional aid.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think too, if we think about like the impetus for this funding formula, the institutions who are serving those populations are already doing it. And so by giving them more money to continue and improve on those resources, students then are able to benefit, right? Because they are able to indulge in those resources more, and more students can indulge in them. So that's another piece, is like as institutions can support their student bases more, right, by providing more resources and opportunities, then the students get that. I think the idea here is looking at the institutions that are serving Black, Brown, minority, first generation, low income students. We're like, they're actually doing a pretty good job. Let's figure out how to support that, amplify it, and then standardize it across the state.
Oh, really?
Any other questions? No? Another flawless victory, Mike. Great job. Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate you. Amazing job once again. And yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks so much for having it. Great talk to you.
Again, we want to thank Mike for that very valuable data. We want to thank everyone who joined us in person, as well as those who joined on our system YouTube channel. And I especially want to thank Mr. Troy Aline. You talked earlier in your Students' Right to Learn campaign about the whole goal of education is to educate. And we are grateful that you came and actually fulfilled that goal for us today. And you did it very well, leading us in critical and courageous conversations, because these conversations absolutely not only need to be had today, but we need to continue to have these conversations, because we're bringing attention to it, but we have not solved the problems that need to be solved with funding as well as with rights to learn in this political climate. So please continue to engage in this dialogue. I want to say to our students, we're very grateful for you. We would not exist without you. We also learned a great deal from you today. So again, we appreciate your presence as well as your participation, and we encourage you to continue to lend your voice to these topics, because you matter, your voice matters, and you're valued, heard, and appreciated. So I wanted to say that. I also want to acknowledge the leaders in the room. I want to thank Dr. Greer and Ms. Dina Timmons for really leading this effort and for their hospitality, along with Dr. Frazier as well as Chancellor. We want to thank Dr. Pamela Smoot for being here, as well as our faculty expert in the room. I see David Brooks here. We cannot do any conversation of understanding without him. So we're very pleased and grateful for your leadership and your expertise. And shout out to Tyler as well for being here today. And last but definitely not least, Ms. Doris Williams, who is our ADEI project coordinator. Let's please give her a round of applause, as well as other faculty and staff who are in the room today. To our graduates, congratulations, and also to those who are engaging in finals. We hope you have a very successful finals week. So until next time, thank you and have a great day.